Henry Becker here with Lighthouse Wealth Management, and in this brief video I'm going to talk about central banks. Now, in the post-financial crisis era, meaning post-2008, the central banks around the world were more or less the catalyst for investing markets. And that was up until a few years ago when fundamentals started to take over as the driver behind, at least in the stock market. But in the last 6-7 months, we've seen central banks starting to garner more attention, which begs the question of, a central bank is a private institution that manages a money supply, manages interest rates, and oversees the commercial banking system within a country. It's important to note that a central bank also has a monopoly on the issuance of currency and the money supply. So in modern history, meaning in the last couple hundred years, the first central bank in modern history was the Bank of England, established in 1694. Now, here in the United States, we're actually on our third central bank. The first one was established in 1791. It was called the First Bank of the United States. It had a 20-year charter, and the president at the time, at the end of the 20 years, did not renew the charter. So then in 1816, we got the second Bank of the United States, which had a 20-year charter again, and at the time it was Andrew Jackson did not renew its charter. Then we got our current central bank, the Federal Reserve, in 1913. So it's important to note from a historical perspective, the European central banks, meaning prior to the European Central Bank that exists today, each of the countries had their own central bank, which they still do, but they fall under the jurisdiction of the European Central Bank currently. But historically, those central banks in Europe were set up primarily to fund wars. They were having great difficulty raising money to wage wars. On the other hand, in the United States, the current central bank, the Federal Reserve, was established really because of fear of bank runs. Bank runs being when people lose faith in a bank or a banking system and start pulling money out. It'll put in jeopardy that banking system or that particular bank. So in 1907, there was a pretty serious bank run in the United States, and that more or less is what provided the inputs for the United States wanting a central bank again. So in 1913, we get the Federal Reserve. So if we fast forward to today and look at the Federal Reserve, they have three mandates, really four. One is to promote maximum employment. Two is to maintain stable prices. Three is to foster moderate long-term interest rates. And last is the quiet but original mandate of the Fed, which is to be the lender of last resort, basically backing up the banking system in the United States. So as such, the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C., that's chaired by Jerome Powell, is the epicenter of the Federal Reserve. And then there's 12 regional Federal Reserve banks around the country. And then underneath each regional Federal Reserve is all your banks, PNC Bank, M&T Bank, and so forth. Depending on what region their headquarters is in, those banks that we do business with fall under the jurisdiction of a regional Federal Reserve Bank, which falls under the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington, D.C. If we look at central banking today, as we speak, in the last few months, central banks have become a little bit more prominent or garnering more attention now that they're trying to reverse what was done in 2008, 2009, 10, and so forth with quantitative easing, lowering interest rates. Now we're on the other side of it where we have the Federal Reserve and some of the other central banks trying to reduce their balance sheet and increase interest rates. And this period of uncertainty, because it's not something that's happened before where we have tried to have a global coordination of these types of things, has caused more volatility in the markets. And then as the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world begin to issue statements or take action through policy, we're seeing more and more headlines with central banks in it. So my hope is that this brief video gave you a little bit more insight as to what a central bank is and their role in the world, because in the not too distant future, and quite frankly currently, central banks are an important part of the macroeconomic picture. So again, if you have any questions, issues, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone here on the team at Lighthouse. Thanks.